Kevin was an ordinary man who grew up in a poor family. He was raised by his grandmother, who was a very kind and sympathetic person. Mrs. Baker never punished her grandson, and perhaps that's why Kevin grew up a bully and a daredevil. Since the boy didn't really want to study, school was hard for him, and it was rather unlikely that he could even get into a university. This was also partially due to the fact that, unfortunately, Kevin wasn't smart enough to study on his own, and his grandmother didn't have the money to hire tutors for him. Nevertheless, the man didn't lose heart and quickly found a job after graduating high school. Kevin worked hard, never passing up on job opportunities such as that of a handyman on a construction site or a loader at a store. The man didn't waste any money and helped his grandmother, who couldn't be happier about his success. "I'm so glad that you grew up to be a good person. To think only that you were a bully in school. All you need to do now is find a wife, and I'll be very happy," Mrs. Baker said, looking at her grandson with pride. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'll get a girlfriend. You can rest assured that I won't be single for long," Kevin assured the old lady. "And when will you find a girlfriend if you work day and night? You have to understand, I feel that I don't have much time left, so I'm afraid that I'll never get to see your wedding," said Mrs. Baker sadly. In response to this statement, Kevin immediately tried to calm down his grandmother and distract her from her sad thoughts. Unfortunately, Mrs. Baker was right. She didn't get to see her grandson's wedding. She passed away on a warm September morning, 3 days before her 70th birthday. Needless to say, it was an immense blow for Kevin. Then, for the first time in his life, the man cried. Standing at his grandmother's grave, Kevin felt bitter tears flow down his cheeks, but they didn't bring him any relief. The man realized that with the passing of his only relative, he was now left an orphan. Of course, Kevin had friends, but they could hardly fill the void in his grieving heart, which was left after the death of his grandmother. Since the man didn't have a specific profession, he had to take on low-paying jobs, where no qualifications or any specific skills were required. Nevertheless, Kevin managed to save up, and in a couple of years, he had enough money to buy an old car. Sure, his old Chevrolet wasn't anything like the expensive sports cars sold at car dealerships. Random passersby and even his friends often smiled at the sight of Kevin's car, making sharp jokes about his vehicle. But the man didn't care about anyone else's opinion. He loved his Chevrolet, rubbing it gently with the sponge soaked in car polish. Since he now had his own vehicle, Kevin started working as a taxi driver, taking exclusively the night shifts. And in the daytime, the man worked as a sales rep for a company selling construction materials. Kevin got this job by chance when he saw a recruiting notice hanging on a stand. The man liked this job, and it brought a good income at first. Of course, working around the clock took a lot of strength and energy, which couldn't but affect Kevin's well-being. Therefore, having made his choice in favor of the sales rep job, Kevin stopped working as a taxi driver. It was around that time that Kevin got a girlfriend who instantly conquered his soul and heart. And 6 months later, despite the fact that the company was doing so well, Kevin began to notice that every year his salary was getting smaller and smaller. However, judging from the happy faces of his colleagues, Kevin concluded that their salaries didn't get cut. Kevin tried talking to his manager about it, but his answers only offended the man. "Kevin, you work in sales, and the sales plan changes every day. You need to keep up with the times and show more perseverance instead of looking for someone to blame and counting on other people's income," his boss answered condescendingly. "But that's not fair, Mr. Taylor. Many of my colleagues work with large shopping centers, and I have to sell my products in small shops. Of course they won't sell as much," objected Kevin, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. In response, the manager told Kevin that he should hold on to his job at all costs instead of asking for a raise. The conversation didn't go as Kevin had hoped, and leaving the office, he slammed the door loudly. Unfortunately for Kevin, this wasn't all the bad news for the day. On his way home, he started hearing some loud sounds coming from under the hood of his Chevrolet. Something was clearly wrong with the car. Deciding that it would be better not to postpone dealing with this matter, Kevin immediately took the car to the car service to try to find out what was causing the strange sound. The mechanic spent a long time digging under the hood of the Chevrolet, after which he delivered his verdict. "The engine and suspension need to have some major work done, and I have to warn you, it won't be cheap. But if I were you, I wouldn't hold off on doing it. Having learned the amount he'd have to pay for the repairs, Kevin shook his head sadly. He didn't have this kind of money at the time, and this realization made him miserable. To make things worse, as Kevin was leaving the car shop, he got a text from his girlfriend Melissa telling him that she was leaving him for another man. Feeling powerless, Kevin hit the steering wheel and started crying. Melissa had repeatedly hinted to Kevin that he didn't earn enough money to be able to provide for her in the future. And now, at the low point of his life, Melissa left him for another man. Getting so much bad news at once couldn't but take its toll on Kevin. Thus, without even noticing it happened, the man fell into deep depression. Not knowing how to deal with the feeling of despair, the man drove to the bridge, planning to drive his car into the river at high speed. Kevin didn't feel any fear because he knew that it was highly unlikely that anyone would grieve for the poor orphan man who decided to kill himself. When he was only a couple of meters away from the bridge, out of the corner of his eye, Kevin saw some car's taillights flickering in the depths of the ditch. The man parked at the curb and got out of the warm Chevrolet. To his surprise, there was a sports car that cost a lot of money lying upside down in the ditch. Kevin stepped closer and saw movement inside. The man barely managed to open the driver's door and saw that a young woman was at the wheel. "How are you feeling? Do you need help?" Kevin asked worriedly, giving the stranger his hand so that she could get out of the car. But to his surprise, the woman began to shout something indistinctive, which sounded a bit like cursing, but for some reason, it didn't feel like an insult, but was even somewhat funny. In any case, Kevin pulled her out and helped her into his car. "Calm down, I'll call an ambulance now," said the man, taking an old phone out of his pocket. "You don't need to call anyone, I'm fine. I had a little drink, and I don't need problems with the police. It's not like anyone got hurt. Just give me your phone. I need to make a call," said the stranger. Kevin shrugged and gave the woman his old cell phone. "Oh God, what is this thing? Don't you have a smartphone? Wow, honestly, I don't even know how to use it. And your car? Where did you even get this junk?" the stranger asked, continuing to cuss. Her words made Kevin blush, feeling both embarrassed and offended. "Well, okay, since everything is so messed up with you, just take me home. I'll give you the address," the woman ordered and looked at Kevin, annoyed. Smiling timidly in response, the man drove the stranger to her house and then drove back. But Kevin didn't want to drive off the bridge anymore. It was all because of his encounter with that woman. She distracted him from his sad thoughts and pulled him out of his depression, at least for a bit. On his way home, Kevin kept thinking about the woman's strange, playful chatter and her funny, strange-sounding cursing. Kevin spent the next 2 days looking for a new job, but his search was unsuccessful. Suddenly, sitting in front of the TV in the evening, Kevin heard a knock on his door. The surprised man opened the door and saw the same stranger that he pulled out of the car in the ditch 2 days ago, standing on the other side of the door. "What are you looking at?" "Hey, don't be so surprised. It wasn't all that hard to find out your address, given my father's connections and license plate of your rattletrap. So get ready. I seem to owe you, so I'm taking you out to dinner," the girl said with a smile. At first, Kevin was a little confused, but then he thought for a couple of minutes and happily accepted the invitation. Since the stranger's car was being repaired, they had to take Kevin's old Chevrolet. On their way to the restaurant, where the woman made a reservation, the young people got to talking, and Kevin learned that his companion's name was Sherry. In the cozy atmosphere of the restaurant, experiencing strong mutual sympathy, they continued the conversation and learned a lot about each other. Kevin told Sherry about his problems and the reasons that made him want to drive off the bridge. For the first time in a long time, the man was relieved to have shared his most intimate secrets with someone. Sherry listened patiently and then said, "Well, there's nothing I can do about your wreck on wheels, but I could easily help you with work. Well, not personally, but my dad will help you get a job at his firm." Hearing the woman out, Kevin rejected her offer, but she didn't give up. "You already tried helping yourself by driving off the bridge. Let me try helping you this time," said Sherry, taking the man's hand encouragingly. Not wanting to offend the woman, Kevin accepted her offer and the next day, he went to an interview with their father, who owned several businesses in the city. To Kevin's surprise, his experience in sales made him a great candidate, and he was happily hired as a manager. Thanks to his new job, the life of a man who just recently wanted to drown himself in the river improved significantly and even started bringing him joy. Now, working at the firm during the day, Kevin spends all his free nights with Sherry, whom he loves very much. And he believes with all his heart that these feelings are mutual.